It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Ms. Dorries. I'm most grateful to the Government Minister for attending, and I'd like to first start by extending to him an invitation to visit my wonderful constituency. In this debate, I would like to raise the issue of the islands, or the Isle of Wight's local government funding, to explain why that system is prejudiced against the island, why it is not fair, and why recognising that disadvantage and rectifying it would in no way set a precedent. Indeed, I very much hope that my right honourable friend would see it as being the right thing to do. I'm focusing on local government finance in this debate for the island, and I hope to be calling debates in future to examine the island factor in relation to health and housing and other policies. Overall, what I would like to be working towards is an island deal that includes a settlement over local government funding, but more broadly a partnership with central government across departments that recognises the unique and valuable role that the Isle of Wight plays in our national life. And this is not only about money, although it comes into that slightly, but it's about helping us make the island even more of a success. Now, firstly, we are an island. I know that is a statement of the obvious, but I say that because I feel that sometimes Whitehall assumes that we're not really an island in the true sense of the word of being surrounded by water. Well, we are an island, we are surrounded by water, and we are dependent on the ferries to get us to and from the mainland, which is the bit that my right honourable friend lives on, otherwise known as North Island. We have a unique place in the nation's artistic, cultural, scientific and political heritage. Our geology is unique too. We have some 70 miles of coastline, parts of which contain the richest dinosaur finds in Europe. Half of the Isle of Wight is an area of outstanding natural beauty, and arguably we should be England's next national park. We are the largest constituency in Britain with some 140,000 souls, and ours is a little island, but which has inspired great things and great achievements, and I would not wish to be anywhere else. From a government perspective, we aim to be national leaders in recycling, in integrated public services model, and in combining health and social care, to name but three. However, there is a problem with local government funding, and put simply, it is that the island's status as an island is not taken into account. In the 1990s, John Major's government promised the Isle of Wight a study into the extra cost of being an island. Nothing ever came of that proposal, yet the cost remained. So today I'm asking my right honourable friend if he would consider honouring that pledge. In the meantime, or instead of, I am presenting another option to my right honourable friend. In a 2015 study by the University of Portsmouth, the extra cost of providing local government services on the Isle of Wight, the island factor, was estimated at £6.4 million, at £6.4 million per annum, based on 2015-2016 data, an additional 3% on the public service provision. The information is on page 2 of phase 2 of the report, Impact of Physical Separation from the Mainland on Isle of Wight Public Service Delivery, and I've circulated copies to my right honourable friend and to his excellent team of civil servants, and thank you also for being here today. That report has been peer-reviewed and is undergoing further review at the moment. Portsmouth University broke down those extra costs into three. The first was forced self-sufficiency, the lack of spillover of public goods provision to and from neighbouring authorities. So we have an obligation to provide a service on the island, but we can't sometimes share costs with the mainland. Fire service, for example. Secondly, the island premium. This refers to the additional cost of conducting business on and with the Isle of Wight. For the provision of public services, this may refer to the relatively higher prices that may be charged by contractors or reflected in the price of goods and services. And we try to be competitive as possible, but clearly, within a confined space, there are limits. And thirdly is what they described as dislocation. And this refers to the costs associated with physical and indeed perceived separation from the mainland, sometimes referred to as isolation. It is a common characteristic in all islands, and it is seen in terms of small area, small population, and small market. Other reports have said much the same. These include Coopers and Lybrand in 1996, the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment in 2000, PricewaterhouseCoopers in 2004, the Effects of Being an Island from the Isle of Wight Council in 2005, European Spatial Observation Network report in 2013, and the University of Portsmouth report in 2015. May I ask, would my right honourable friend agree with me that we are potentially dealing with decades of historic underfunding? And would my right honourable friend agree with me that the University of Portsmouth's review is academically rigid and backed by a wealth of primary and secondary material? Moving back a little bit further, I believe that the island is a victim of the funding system, and I'll outline briefly, if I may, the reasons why. First, we are prejudiced against in public project funding. The Green Book assessments, the way that government rates public sector investment, does not work for the island because we're physically separate. And that separation results in a lower cost-benefit ratio. We don't have spillover. I can't prove that a project that will do great things for Sandown or Newport or Freshwater has an effect in Fareham or Southampton or Portsmouth because we're an island. So we can't make the same arguments as everywhere else in Britain that is connected physically to the mainland or is part of the mainland, because we simply haven't got that. May I ask the Minister what he would suggest that we, and indeed the government, can do about that? Secondly, we are isolated, but because we are isolated by water, we fail to qualify for the Rural Service Delivery Grant, because that grant's funding basis does not recognise the isolation of being an island and does not take into account physical separation in its definition of isolation. Can my right honourable friend suggest a reason why this may be the case? And may I ask my right honourable friend, again, what he considers that government could do about it? Third, the ferries were privatised with no public service obligation, a significant and pretty unique error. There appears to be no desire to rectify that situation, yet elsewhere public money tends to get thrown at locations with isolation issues. And on the Isle of Wight, we spend over £100 million a year on the ferries. May I ask my right honourable friend what he thinks of this situation and whether he thinks it is acceptable or not? Fourth, health model funding calculations for over 80-year-olds are arguably seen as inadequate because of the complex health and adult social care needs when you hit 80 and you get into your 9th and 10th decades. And because we have more 80-plus residents and islanders than the national average, this impacts significantly on our adult social care costs. Fifth, recent NHS reports have simply ignored the island factor, as if the Solent somehow didn't exist. So those are just some factors that I bring to my right honourable friend's attention. Please don't get me wrong. We love being an island and having that wonderful identity and having, a different festival every weekend and being this fantastic place that people come to with our wonderful quality of life. So I'm not arguing for some special pleading. But when government writes the rules, it doesn't seem to take the island into account. And I'm presuming that government funding formulas are based on the idea of being broadly fair. Now, if the right honourable friend is going to say, actually, government funding formulas that are based on the idea of being broadly unfair, I will go away. But I'm assuming that he will say that, actually, we do try to be fair. And if that's the case, can we please not be permanently prejudiced against my island and recognise that the island has issues in public service provision by dint of being an island? Scottish Islands, as we know, the Scottish Islands needs allowance, get extra money based on a number of factors. Welsh Islands seem to have bridges galore, but we have none of that. We have only the world's most expensive unregulated ferries. I was having a conversation with a ferry owner, and I said, is there a more expensive ferry anywhere in the world? And he said, we'll try the chain link between Cowes and East Cowes, and I thought that's not a great answer. Government recognises that islands play a special role in our British islands, and we would just like that for the Isle of Wight, for England's island as well. Next, may I make a brief point, please, about the fair funding formula due to be implemented in 2021. a previous colleague of my right honourable friend, a previous Secretary of State, has said the cost associated with being an island separated from the mainland will be given due consideration as part of the fair funding formula. In the Fair Funding Review technical consultation, I believe the word island has actually appeared along with the question asking, should island status be taken into account? When I read that, I sort of alhamdulillah and hallelujah. Will my right honourable friend, we clearly believe that the answer to that question should be a resounding yes. Will my right honourable friend indicate perhaps whether he thinks there is some case for that justification that island status should be taken into account when it comes to a fair funding formula? I would now, Madam Speaker, with your permission, briefly address 2 points. We have generally been given 2 answers at this point. Firstly, that devolution is the answer to all your problems, and secondly, you're setting a precedent, so we're not interested. Firstly, regards devolution. There was it isn't the answer, and it's for these reasons. Firstly, there was extraordinarily little information in the Solent devolution package. Secondly, it was clear that it was simply a device by which more housing can be forced on the island. Housing is a problem on the island. The housing targets that government has set, to my mind, are completely unacceptable, and the current system on the island serves nobody, and by building on greenfield sites, we neither provide housing for our youngsters and for the people on the housing list who need it, but we also damage our economy because we are tourism dependent in part. This is not, however, a conversation for now, but I would like to return to it in due course. Third, the Solent devolution deal, as offered, was a Treasury construct. Now, the Treasury is full of many wise and sensible people, and they have a difficult job to do, and I give them that respect. But what looks good in London may not work on the ground. Fourth, to put it bluntly, there was nothing in it for the Isle of Wight. The key devolution power that we would want is the power to impose a public service obligation on the ferries, which the ferries would pay for, with no reduction in services elsewhere. The cost of the public service obligation would come from the ferries' inflated profits. And just for my right honourable friend's knowledge, because I know he may not be aware of the history of the Isle of Wight ferries, these are the ferries that were privatised badly in the 1980s without a public service obligation, which are amongst the most expensive in the world, which make multiples of profits compared to public infrastructure industry standards, and which rack up hundreds of millions of pounds of debt, have racked up hundreds of millions of pounds of debt that islanders pay for. So will my right honourable friend support giving us that PSO powers? I would be curious, which may mean having to cap ferry profits and debt levels. I would be genuinely interested in my right honourable friend's opinion on that. The second, Madam Speaker, is the issue of precedent. The government can't possibly give us an island factor because it would set a precedent. Now, I don't understand. Is government implying that Cornwall is going to dig a ditch a mile wide, fill it with water and declare itself an island? Is Northamptonshire somehow going to up sticks and move? Is Lindisfarne going to go on some 3-dimensional steroid programme? I think not. I think not. I think recognising that that there is an island factor for the Isle of Wight will not start a precedent unless that precedent is that the government accepts that we're a little bit different, a little bit special, a little bit unique, and works with us for the island to become the jewel of southern England, as it has been and as it hoped will be in future. And may I say that listening to us and working with us on a new deal, an island deal, would be a wonderful precedent, and I thank my right honourable friend for being here again today. So summing up, I would like to remind my right honourable friend that the amounts of money that we seek, 6.4 million, are small. They're tiny in government expenditure. They are margins of error in the government accounting system. Whitehall probably spends more on paper clips every month. And I would like to remind my right honourable friend that a previous government made promises of Isle of Wight studies regarding funding that weren't kept. So will my right honourable friend support a study to honour the promises of an earlier government? Or in the meantime, would my right honourable friend agree that there are additional costs of being an island, which have been quantified by the University of Portsmouth, which I've quoted today, and that those costs are unique to an island? So please, would my right honourable friend respect, accept and implement this year and going forward those costs outlined in the Portsmouth report? Would my right honourable friend also agree that devolution is not in itself an answer, and also that there is no conceivable precedent that would be set by honouring a fair funding formula that recognises the island as just that, an island? Would my right honourable friend assure us also that our submission for extra funding will be looked at seriously this year? And if there's any doubt over that, may we have that promised meeting which has not yet materialised, and can we have it in time for that before the finalised settlement for this year? Next, would my right honourable friend commit to the inclusion of an island status, an island factor, in the fair funding review, and for that funding formula to be accepted and implemented in full? I thank my right honourable friend once again for his time. Thank you very much indeed, Madam Speaker, and I extend again to the honourable member an invitation from the people of the Isle of Wight to come and visit us. You'll have a wonderful time, as our 2 million annual visitors do. Thank you very much.
The question is, this House has considered local government funding on the Isle of Wight, Minister.
Thank you, Ms Dorries. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship in this, my first Westminster Hall debate in this new role. And first of all, may I congratulate my honourable friend on securing this vital debate. In the very short time he has been in Parliament, my honourable friend has already made an impression as a passionate and committed advocate for the Isle of Wight, and his speech today, I believe, demonstrated exactly why he has that reputation. I very much welcome the chance to respond to the points made today and thank him for sharing his knowledge of the Isle of Wight, an island of which I am particularly fond, having grown up just across the water in Southampton, or as he described it, the North Island. This morning's reflections on the island, the jewel of southern England, as he says, have prompted me to recall the summers that I spent enjoying all that which the Isle of Wight has to offer to those who visit. Just this weekend, whilst I watched Gary Oldman bring to life Winston Churchill in the darkest hour, I recalled the island's Churchill Trail. I remember that as a child, the former Prime Minister used to stay at the home of his friend Jack Seeley, and it did occur to me if there was indeed any connection to my honourable friend's family, perhaps something he can touch on in his winding up. Regardless, whether it is the Isle of Wight Festival or Caresbrook Castle, Blackgang Chine or the Needles, I know personally just how much there is to enjoy, to educate and to entertain. Members may know that today is the last day for responses to the consultation on the Provisional Local Government Finance Settlement. I would like to say a few words about this first and then come on to the specific points raised by my honourable friend. Last month, the Secretary of State confirmed the settlement for local government, which sees 2 years of real terms increases in available resources to local government. The extra flexibility on council tax announced means that the total core spending power this financial year of £44.3 billion will rise to £45.6 billion by 2019-20. And for the Isle of Wight specifically, this means £132 million in 1920, up from 127 in 15-16. That represents a 4% cash increase overall, which I note is double the national average. Councils know their communities best, the priorities, the challenges, and the opportunities available. I'm aware that my honourable friend is already looking at ways to raise the island's profile, generate jobs, and support the tourism industry. Efforts my department both applauds and supports. Indeed, councils across England are showing they are capable of finding efficiencies whilst continuing to provide for their communities. They are playing their part in tackling the deficit which this government remains committed to doing. And I am keen in my new role to build on the good work that is already underway. An important aspect of this will be giving local authorities the levers and incentives to grow their local economies. And I was delighted to hear that the Solent authorities have been selected as one of the new 100% business rate retention pilots for this forthcoming year. These pilots have proved incredibly popular, with over 200 authorities putting themselves forward for consideration. So I know the Isle of Wight Authority will be excited to have this special opportunity, and I am keen to see what we can learn from them. It is worth noting that this ability to retain 100% of business rates is estimated to benefit the Solent authorities by up to £3.3 million this year. Extra resources that I know will be welcome and a due benefit from driving local economic growth. Well, turning now to the specific points made by my honourable friend this morning. Firstly, and most importantly, I feel, in relation to the geographical position of the island. And I am most grateful to my honourable friend for comprehensively setting out a number of the key issues affecting his constituency, and I have noted carefully his concerns about how we currently distribute the funding available across local government. Clearly, Ms Dorries, the Isle of Wight's geography makes the Council's position distinct and creates both opportunities and challenges to contend with. I thought my honourable friend made this point passionately, and it is a point acknowledged by the former Secretary of State on a visit to the island in 2016. It is absolutely right that in many areas of policy, not just fiscal, we recognise the specific situation of the Isle of Wight and our other islands. So what can I tell my honourable friend do we intend to do about this? Firstly, I have asked my officials to continue exploring the various mechanisms in place in Scotland that he mentioned in relation to islands, with a view to building our knowledge and evidence base. The Department will continue to take steps to inform our understanding of the various factors affecting the cost of delivering services on islands. And for this reason, I was delighted to receive copies of the important research undertaken by the University of Portsmouth regarding the island's particular situation and the potential consequences. Although I am of course not in a position to comment academically, as he asked on the report, I can say it is very welcome to have such thoughtful and detailed analysis to help inform the department's work. And I note my honourable friend also highlighted several other reports in addition. And I can tell my honourable friend that this will all not just be analysis for analysis' sake, for he highlights this issue at a once-in-a-generation time when there is a possibility to do something about it. And that is because my department is currently embarking on a fair funding review. I reiterate the Secretary of State's commitment to undertake a thorough, evidence-based review which uses the most up-to-date available information to assess both current and future resources and needs of local authorities. Members may be aware that we issued a 12-week technical consultation seeking views on exactly this at the end of last year. The idiosyncratic island factors heard today that drive specific costs are exactly the things that we need to hear about and consider in formulating a new funding formula. So I would urge the Isle of Wight Council to submit any relevant evidence they have alongside the other points that they wish to make in their response to this consultation, which we will then consider very carefully. Furthermore, I would like to take the opportunity offered by my honourable friend to meet with him, perhaps colleagues from the University of Portsmouth and his local authority, to discuss the findings in more detail as part of our future conversations on the fair funding review. I will more broadly be encouraging input from all members and representatives from across local government so that we can work together to create an updated and more responsive local government financial system. My honourable friend also raised the issue of the Rural Service Delivery Grant, noting that the island is currently not a recipient. And this is due, as he said, to the particular sparsity methodology which it uses. We have recently announced that this grant will be funded through increased business rates retention from 2020-2021, and when we aim to implement our fair funding review, which will redistribute business rates across the sector. And I think my honourable friend may well have given us a good example of why we need to revisit the underlying basis for the relative needs allocations between local authorities. as many of these formulas have not been updated in over a decade. Similarly, my honourable friend made the point about population growth, particularly in the age categories which drive social care. As I've discovered in the last week, the formulas that we currently use are indeed relatively old and do not dynamically take into account changing populations, which is something that his council is experiencing. As I've said, this review is looking afresh at how we take such key factors into account: rurality, remoteness, population growth. And so I welcome members' support in helping us to deliver an outcome which is robust, collaborative, and evidence-based. This is the perfect time to shape the discussion, with our consultation currently live. Turning now to the local government finance settlement, which has also been mentioned by my honourable friend this morning. We are, as he knows, 3 years into a 4-year deal, which provides funding certainty for these councils who published their efficiency plans. And I'm delighted that the Isle of Wight was one of those that took up the offer. We recognise the pressure faced by all local authorities, particularly in light of pressures in areas such as social care, and that is why, subject to Parliament's approval, the government will increase the core referendum principle. As a result, the Isle of Wight in specific would have the flexibility to increase their council tax by up to 6% this year, delivering funds of up to £4.9 million. My understanding is that the Council is currently awaiting responses to their consultation on the 18-19 budget, and I understand there is to be a public meeting today with members about how best to allocate the funding. It is good to see the island's community steering the Council's vision from issues on partnership working, adult social care, and housing. I look forward to receiving the Council's response to the provisional settlement, and my officials will be looking carefully and considering all the responses provided ahead of the final settlement imminently in a few weeks. Turning to devolution, the government is committed to empowering local authorities and rebalancing the local economy through local devolution and growth deals. And we know that devolution can bring multiple benefits, including more accountable and effective institutions at the right scale. But I note the points my honourable friend has made on the issue of devolution. And clearly, it is important that we work towards a model which works for each individual area. And I understand my colleague, the Minister for Local Growth, is visiting his area in March, and I look forward to hearing about those discussions when they take place. Lastly, I wanted to turn briefly to the issues relating to infrastructure, skills, and business support. I recognise my honourable friend has an inspiring vision and strong ambitions for the constituency that he represents so proudly. And it is absolutely right that government does its best to support those aspirations. I am pleased to note that this government has supported investment in these areas on the Isle of Wight through the growth deal awarded to the local Solent Enterprise Partnership. And through the Solent LEP, £14.7 million of funding has been invested locally through the Centre of Excellence for Composite Advanced Manufacturing and Marine at the Isle of Wight College and the floating bridge at Cowes. The LEP has also invested £750,000 of regional growth funding, which was used to set up the Rural Business Fund. All of this will help contribute to the island's economic growth, leveraging private investment, creating jobs, and assisting the rural sector. So in conclusion, Ms. Dorries, again, I would like to thank my honourable friend for calling this debate on this important issue and for bringing these particular matters to my attention so early in my tenure in this role. He is right to be ambitious for his island and to fight for them to get the consideration they deserve. I look forward to working closely with him in the coming months to address the challenges and opportunities that he has highlighted.
Cecilia, would you like to come back in the last 50 seconds?
I thank my right honourable friend for his words. Just a point of fact, Jack was a great-great-uncle. He was elected as a Conservative despite the fact that he's a Liberal. It's a long story. I thank my right honourable friend for recognising our distinction, for his words on the Scottish Islands Needs Allowance, for his comments on the fair funding formula, which is so important for us. We will submit as much evidence. And finally, although public service debate can sometimes seem arcane, it is important to remember its purpose, which is to build a fair and just society, which is the one that we all aim for. So I thank him again. And thank you.
Question is that this House considered local government funding on the Isle of Wight as may that opinion say aye. Aye. And to the contrary, no. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. Do the sitting suspended? Yeah.